6 seconds. That was all it took to turn a quiet suburban morning into a headline that would never be printed, because the truth terrified everyone involved. I came home to the sound of my wife screaming, a sound that cut deeper than any blade I ever faced overseas. 2 men in mismatched uniforms stood on our porch, badges crooked, voices loud, authority borrowed. They said HOA enforcement. They said compliance. They said nothing about the broken ribs she'd be clutching as she lay on the tile. I didn't touch a weapon. I didn't shout. Training taught me that chaos feeds on noise, and lies survive on panic. I knelt beside her, felt the rise and fall of her breath stutter, saw fingerprints blooming purple along her side. The men kept talking, inventing rules, inventing penalties, inventing courage. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Phones stayed down. Fear loves witnesses who don't witness. I asked for names. They laughed. I asked for ID. One flashed plastic too fast. I asked for a supervisor. One stepped closer, close enough that I smelled cheap cologne and old coffee. He told me to stand down. He told me to remember my place. He told me this was HOA business. That was the moment I knew they weren't cops. Real authority doesn't need theater. The ambulance took her away, siren fading like a promise I wasn't sure would be kept. I stayed behind, answering questions no one asked, watching the pair retreat to a truck without markings, plates smeared with mud. I wrote everything down, times, words, faces. I called real police. I called a lawyer. I called a friend who knows how lies unravel when you pull the right thread. By nightfall, the story everyone thought they knew had already begun to rot. The HOA board denied everything. The fake enforcers vanished. Rumors bloomed wild and dangerous. Some said I snapped. Some said I threatened. Some said I did what the title claims. None of that was true. The truth was quieter, sharper, and far more devastating. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the house echoing with absence, replaying every step, every look, every choice. Overseas, I learned restraint saves lives, and patience exposes predators. Tonight, restraint meant letting systems work, even when rage begged otherwise. I sharpened nothing but memory. Tomorrow would bring cameras, reports, depositions, and the slow grind that scares pretenders most. They mistook my calm for weakness. They would soon learn calm is preparation, and consequences follow those who confuse borrowed badges with real authority at last. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, breath held, until the people who borrowed power realize they never owned it at all. Morning came with paperwork instead of sleep. Hospitals have a way of reducing the world to forms and numbers, and I welcome that order. My wife lay still beneath thin blankets, breathing shallow but steady, eyes open and sharp. She squeezed my hand once, a signal we used long before marriage, long before war. I'm here. Focus. A doctor confirmed 3 fractured ribs, severe bruising, and a long road of healing. He asked what happened. I told him the truth, slowly, without decoration. Outside her room, a uniformed officer finally listened. Real badge. Real questions. I handed over notes, times, descriptions. He frowned when I mentioned the truck, the plastic badge, the HOA name dropped like a shield. He said it wasn't the first call. He said impersonation cases die in daylight unless you pin them down early. I told him we'd already started. By noon, footage arrived. A neighbor's doorbell camera caught the porch from an angle the men didn't expect. Another caught audio. Voices clear. Threats thinly veiled. A shove. The sound of a body hitting tile. No uniforms registered in the system matched what they wore. No HOA had authority to enforce anything beyond letters and fines. The lie had structure, but it was sloppy. The HOA board called me that afternoon. Their president spoke fast, legal words stacked like sandbags. He said the association condemned violence. He said they outsourced compliance. He said he didn't know. I asked who signed the contract. Silence stretched. I asked who approved badges. More silence. I told him we'd speak again, on record. Friends showed up with coffee and patience. A lawyer friend outlined the path. Criminal charges for assault and impersonation. Civil action for negligence. Subpoenas for emails, payments, and training manuals that didn't exist. He said it would take time. I nodded. Time favors the prepared. That night, I watched the footage again, frame by frame, not to feed anger, but to map responsibility. The men weren't ghosts. They were hired muscle with costumes, paid to scare compliance into being. Someone thought fear was cheaper than process. Someone miscalculated. At the hospital window, city lights flickered. I thought about missions where restraint meant survival, where the loudest move was the wrong one. I thought about how justice here wears a suit and carries a pen, and how devastating that can be. The truth doesn't need speed. It needs clarity. By midnight, warrants were drafted. Names surfaced. The borrowed authority cracked under light. Tomorrow, arrests would come. Not with sirens, but with signatures. And the people who hid behind fake power would learn that pretending to be law invites the real thing to knock. Arrests came quietly, the way truth prefers. 2 men were taken from an apartment complex across town, hands cuffed, badges bagged as evidence. Their truck sat nearby, plates cleaned at last, numbers matching a rental paid with an HOA credit card. The board's president issued a statement before noon, full of sorrow and distance. It fooled no one. Detectives walked me through interviews. The men talked fast, blaming contractors, claiming authorization, rehearsed stories unraveling under simple questions. They admitted to pressure tactics. They denied intent. Video disagreed. Medical reports disagreed harder. A third name surfaced, the coordinator who ordered uniforms online and printed decals at a mall kiosk. Fear, it turned out, had a supply chain. Civil filings followed criminal charges like shadows. Depositions forced emails into daylight. A treasurer had warned the board about liability months earlier. A vote was rushed anyway. Fines were down, compliance up, applause at meetings loud. The risk was someone else's problem. Until it wasn't. At the hospital, my wife began breathing exercises, each careful inhale a small victory. She joked once, dry humor cutting pain, asked if suburban villains always came with clipboards. I smiled and told her justice here moves slower than overseas, but it lands heavier. She slept. I watched monitors tick. News tried to find us. We declined. Attention distorts. We focused on records, calendars, and witnesses willing to speak now that permission arrived in the form of arrests. Neighbors apologized for silence. I accepted, because fear freezes good people. Accountability thaws them. The HOA's insurer sent letters reserving rights. Translation: prepare for consequences. Mediation was offered, then withdrawn. Numbers climbed. Board members resigned one by one, statements shrinking with each exit. The coordinator flipped, trading emails for leniency. The story assembled itself without theatrics. I thought about the title people would want, about explosions that never happened, about myths that comfort those who crave spectacle. The truth was steadier. It was signatures and timestamps, bruises documented, lies aligned until they contradicted themselves. It was patience as a weapon that leaves no scars. When the arraignment date was set, I sat at the kitchen table again, the same chair, a different silence. Preparation doesn't end when danger passes. It ends when accountability sticks. And this time, it would carry weight in courtrooms, in insurance ledgers, and in the quiet conversations where boards remember limits. Consequences ripple outward, teaching caution to those watching. Healing would take longer, but truth had momentum now. We would keep showing up, answering carefully, refusing shortcuts. Justice here is not a sprint, it is attendance. Show up enough times, and even borrowed power runs out of excuses. Eventually, systems correct themselves when patience outlasts fear, and records refuse to lie for everyone involved without exception anywhere. Courtrooms have their own climate. Cold air, hard benches, patience measured in docket numbers. I sat behind counsel while motions stacked like dominoes, each one tipped by evidence that refused to disappear. The judge listened without expression, a skill earned by seeing too much. The defendants stared at the table. Their borrowed confidence had evaporated, replaced by the small movements of men realizing costumes don't survive scrutiny. Testimony unfolded cleanly. The neighbor described the shove, voice shaking until the video played and steadied everything. The doctor explained rib fractures with clinical distance, pointing to images that needed no translation. The coordinator's emails appeared on screens, dates circled, instructions highlighted. Apply pressure. Don't take no. They'll fold. The room absorbed each phrase in silence. The HOA's former president took the stand last. He spoke about delegation, about assumptions, about how busy boards rely on experts. Cross-examination narrowed the story. One signature, one rushed vote, one ignored warning. Responsibility doesn't vanish when you pass it along. It multiplies when harm follows. The judge nodded once, a small motion that meant more than applause ever could. Outside, mediation reopened with different numbers. Apologies arrived, heavier now that consequences had names and statutes. We declined shortcuts. Accountability works best when it's complete. Insurance negotiated. Criminal cases advanced. Plea discussions surfaced. Truth has a way of making people practical. At home, recovery became routine. Ice packs, slow walks, laughter at the absurdity of it all. My wife taped a note to the fridge. Breathe. Heal. Repeat. We followed it. Strength returns in increments. Trust, too, when you let it. Sentencing day came without drama. The men admitted guilt. The judge spoke about impersonation as erosion, about how fear poisons communities when authority is faked. Penalties were measured, not theatrical. Probation, restitution, records that would follow them. The coordinator received leniency, not freedom from consequence. Cooperation isn't absolution, it's mitigation. The HOA dissolved its enforcement arm entirely. New bylaws passed, training mandated. Oversight committees formed by neighbors who once stayed quiet. Systems learned slowly, the lesson they resisted quickly. Fear is expensive. Process is cheaper. I stood in the hallway afterward, listening to footsteps echo, thinking about how restraint looks boring from the outside. It doesn't sell myths. It doesn't fit loud titles. But it protects people. It builds records. It forces change that lasts longer than adrenaline. We drove home together, windows down, city moving on. Justice didn't roar. It settled. And in settling, it changed the shape of the place we live, nudging it towards something safer. That's enough. It always was. The rest is noise. Months later, the house sounded normal again. Not quiet, not tense. Just lived in. Plates clinked. The dog snored. My wife moved carefully but confidently, strength returning like a tide that doesn't announce itself. Healing had rewritten our calendar. Court dates faded into follow-ups. Then memories filed away where they belong. The civil settlement closed without ceremony. Funds went to medical bills first, then counseling, then a cushion we hoped never to need. The agreement included training mandates and independent oversight, clauses written in plain language so no one could pretend confusion later. The HOA's new board mailed letters acknowledging harm without hedging. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was responsibility. That matters. People still asked what really happened, fishing for a version that fit the loud title they'd heard. I told them the truth, trimmed of spectacle. There was no explosion, no 6 seconds of noise. There was patience, paperwork, and witnesses who learned to speak. Some were disappointed. Most were relieved. Communities don't need legends. They need guardrails. We hosted a small dinner for neighbors who showed up when it counted. Stories drifted to safer topics. Laughter found its way back into rooms that had held their breath. Someone asked how to stop this from happening again. My wife answered before I could. Ask questions, she said. Demand receipts. Don't be scared of minutes and votes. Simple advice, durable advice. On a walk one evening, ribs still tender but posture strong, she stopped at the end of the block and looked back at the house. I don't want to leave, she said. I want this place to be better. It already was. Better because harm met resistance without becoming harm itself. Better because fear lost to record-keeping and resolve. I thought about the difference between strength and restraint, about how restraint is invisible until it's the only thing left standing. Overseas, restraint kept teams alive. Here, it kept a neighborhood honest. Different terrain, same principle. If there's a lesson worth keeping, it's this. Authority must be proven, not performed. When someone borrows it, check the stitching. When someone abuses it, document everything. When someone gets hurt, slow down and do it right. Justice isn't fast, but it is thorough when you insist. We locked the door, turned out the lights, and went to bed. Tomorrow would be ordinary. That's the win. Ordinary nights, earned the long way, last longer than any headline ever could.